Earlier this week, I was chatting with a funeral director. We were just talking about how hard it is right now doing ministry with people in this time. Just almost the lack of person-to-person relationships sometimes, and how, especially at funerals, we have to keep distance. You can't shake the hands of the grieving family or give a hug to someone who's feeling very sad. It's a tough time to be doing ministry, and I was reflecting that in some ways we're even more and more in the heart of St. John, because St. John surely felt that same kind of sadness as he sat there watching Jesus die on the cross. Nothing he could do. There was very little he could do. He had to somehow minister to his best friend kind of from a distance, and that's hard. There's a sadness surely that was there. I'd say that's probably one of the hardest things about the ministry in general, is the fact that we can't eliminate someone else's suffering, someone else's pain. We can go to the hospital and visit someone who's ill and hooked up to machines, but we can't take away their pain. We can meet with the grieving family after the loss of a loved one, but we can't bring their loved one back. We can meet with the person who's struggling with all sorts of questions and doubts about their faith, but we can't make them see what we see. We can just accompany. We can be side by side. We can love a person where they are and show them the friendship of St. John, but we can't remove their suffering. We can't remove their pain. Today, we're invited to be with St. John at the foot of the cross. We're invited to enter into his experience, into his heart, as he was powerless in the face of being able to help his best friend. He could not stop them from putting a crown of thorns on his head. He couldn't stop them from mocking him, from spitting on him, from hitting him. He couldn't stop them from nailing him to those beams. He couldn't take him down from the cross as he hung there for 3 hours before he passed. It was a challenging time for John to just feel powerless, but he was doing everything he could. He stayed with Jesus to the end, the only one who would do that of the 12 apostles. He was right there by the side of his best friend, showing him love the best way that he could. And we get today's gospel from John's perspective. He, more than anybody, remembers those hours standing next to Christ on the cross. He, more than anybody, remembers every drop of blood from that crown of thorns and every scourge from that whip. Just like anyone who's been through a tragedy or a dramatic experience in their life, they remember maybe every moment in great detail. And so John's version of the Passion is so personal, and he describes himself in that as the beloved disciple, the one that Jesus loved, because that's what he knew he was in the eyes of Jesus. He knew that he had that closeness with the Lord, so he's happy to describe himself as the one that Jesus loved. And so we get these details in this Passion that none of the other Gospels tell us about. John's the one who tells us about his side being pierced. At the end of the Gospel, we heard that the other two who were being crucified next to Jesus had their legs broken to make them die faster. But Jesus, they could see that he was already passed. And so a soldier took his lance and thrust it into his side. And from his side flowed blood and water, the gospel tells us. Of course, John would remember that detail, probably for a number of reasons. Maybe it's a striking thing. You would expect the blood, maybe you wouldn't expect the water. There's a scientific reason for that, of course. With the duress that his body was going through, there was fluid developing around his heart. And so when his heart was pierced, that fluid would have poured out, that water would have come out of his side. But John, being a man of prayer and a man who knew the Jewish scriptures, he probably thought of something else. He knew there was a deeper meaning to this moment. There's a passage in the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament where Ezekiel is having this vision in prayer. The Lord shows him the temple sitting on the mount, and flowing from the temple is water. And it starts off as a small trickle, and as he follows that trickle of water, it becomes a more and more lively water. It becomes deeper, it becomes wider. It gets to the point that you couldn't even swim across it. The current is so strong. And he describes how there's all sorts of life growing up around this river. There's trees whose leaves never fade, and their fruit is always abundant, and it's always in season. And the point is that from the temple comes life for the whole world, and it's a life in abundance, and it's a life that will never pass. So of course, John thinks of that. As Jesus' side is pierced and water flows from his side. Remember, he described his body as a temple. He said, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. That temple is now, has water flowing from it. And John remembers Ezekiel. This is the water. This is the one from whom all life comes. It's a sign of hope, really, in the midst of the sadness of being with Jesus for hours in his suffering. To see this water flow from his side as a sign that from this moment, from this crucifixion, life will come, joy will come. There is hope, there is peace. And so in some ways, as we enter into Good Friday today from John's perspective, we enter into it with all of the emotion, all of the sadness that John would feel. But there's also that little bit of hope in our heart. There's that joy that we're holding on to, knowing that this is the sacrifice that brings life and life in abundance. So today, we're called to be St. John. We're called to be with Our Lady at the foot of the cross, holding her hand, being with her, and staying right there by Jesus' side, because he is our best friend.